Happy New Year.
We're here.
We're back.
January.
Dude, January. Taking a little hiatus, but we are back with the Rooted Podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for tuning in wherever you consume your podcast, whether it's Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube. Thank you guys. We just want to thank you, man. We
love y'all.
Yeah, we love you. And we kicked this off in 2024 and really appreciate all the feedback, encouragement. I know a lot of you, I'd love to know where you guys are listening from.
Yeah.
Man, put it in the comments, whether it's on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify. There's places there where you guys can leave comments for us. Man, we'd love to hear more feedback and encouragement, maybe even episode ideas of what you guys would love for us to talk about. But we're in a fun season. We just came out of vision season, which now we are in a place where it's like, okay, now we're implementing vision in our church. And we said our word for the year is grow, which that means growing in maturity, multiplication, and mission. We're about to turn 13 years old.
Officially a teenager.
Officially a teenager.
Wow, man.
So fun times as a church. And obviously January, man, we're ready to ramp things up. And so we're getting ready to kick off our very first ever church-wide discipleship training institute.
Yeah.
I think it's probably too late to register for that now, but if you're new to hearing about Discipleship Training Institute, man, it's we have 4 total semesters. It's a spring, fall semester, so it's a 2-year program. But man, we teach theology, church history, discipleship, pastoral, preaching, teaching. It's all encompassing and it's incredible. We did a kind of like a trial run for a couple semesters, and now we've opened it up church wide. And I think, man, I mean, we've got full classroom in all 4 classes coming up. That starts February 10th. Super pumped for that. Tell us what else is going on.
Yeah, man. So we have one of my favorite things that we do here is our 24-hour prayer experience. And if you've never been a part of those, they are so sweet. And it's us just creating space to be intentional as a church, to make room and to be in the presence of Jesus for 24 hours. I remember the first time we did this, I was like, 24-hour prayer experience, what all? But it's one of my most favorite things that we do now. Also, our worship night and prayer night, that's also coming up that I'm looking forward to as well.
What are dates on all this stuff?
Those dates are
Friday, January 24th.
Yes.
It starts the 24-hour prayer experience, and that runs through from 6 p.m. Friday to 6 p.m. Saturday night on the 25th, and then the 26th that night.
That's the
6 p.m.
Yep, 6 p.m. worship night and prayer night.
And we're also ordaining our first elder and deacon team. So we have some couples that we are ordaining that night. Man, it's going to be a powerful, powerful night of
jam-packed month. It's incredible.
Prayer. But listen, maybe you're listening and you don't attend our church, but you want to join us. Maybe wherever you're at, you'll say, hey, on the 24th and 25th, I'll fast that 24 hours. I'll pray. I'll take time out to pray throughout the day. We have sections all over the church where we actually have segments where you can pray with your kids, segments where we have crosses, communion, candles. We have rooms for silence and solitude. It's just an incredible opportunity to pray, but you can do that wherever you're at. You don't have to be here in the building. So we'd love for you guys to join us in that. So the podcast. So just a reminder, if you're a first-time listener, we like to talk about getting to the root of issues. We said we need to confront the issue. What is the root of my issue? We need to confess, man, I'm a sinner. I need a savior. I need to be vulnerable. I need to learn. I need to grow. Ask God to help keep me accountable for my discipleship of Jesus. And then last but not least, construct. What kind of spiritual formation needs to take place in my life? In other words, what are my action steps after I've confronted, confessed? Now I need to construct. What are some of the action steps for me to lead towards the abundant life that Christ offers and wholeness and healing in my life? I just want to remind you, every 6 weeks, we will do a Q&A episode. And so please leave us questions. There's a link going to be provided right now. Bing!
There it is.
You're going to see that link. Click on that link. Leave us your questions. When we get to that episode, we will spend time just walking through people's questions and answering them the best as possible. I actually like question and response better than question and answer, because our response isn't always...
Might not be an answer.
And we don't know everything. So, but man,
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this month. I'm looking forward to 2025.
Yeah,
I cannot wait to continue to grow in maturity, multiplication, and mission.
Today's conversation is fun, man.
Yes, and I'm also looking forward to the podcast. So Let's jump in today on our very first episode of 2025 on creating habits for the perfect day.
Check it out. What's up, bro?
Man, how are you?
Good, dude. Back at it.
Yeah, it's been a while, dude.
Been a minute.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think you were singing that song.
It's been a while.
Oh, man. Yeah, we took a little break, holidays, things like that, and try to revamp the podcast so we can bring you guys some fresh material for 2025. And, man, we've spent some time planning and mapping out episodes. And, man, we are super excited to bring you guys a whole other year of the Rooted podcast.
Come on.
And so, man, how's your new year been?
It's been great, man. It's been really, really fun. Been really enjoying. We're in 21 days of prayer and fasting right now as a church.
Yeah, dude.
That's been super encouraging and challenging at the same time, man. Our Christmas was amazing, too, this year. Our family, I got 3 kids. They're 6, 4, and 2, and we sat down over Christmas. Yeah. And we tried to just prioritize, hey, while we celebrate Christmas, we started the Advent candles, and that was the most beautiful, but yet the most chaotic thing to do with fire and everything at our kitchen table with our 3 kids. But, man, it's been great. New Year's been good, and I'm excited for the rest of the year, man. How about you?
Dude, oh, man, so excited. Just like you, in 21 days of prayer and fasting, and it's always a special time for our church. And this year, I think it was 2 years ago, where we saw the massive revival, where we saw like 100 people baptized in 40 days. It was incredible. And so it's always a special time to kind of recenter our focus for the year. And of course, this year, you know, as a church, we're focusing on this word grow.
Yeah.
And we talked about growing in maturity, mission, and multiplication. And so right now we're in this series called The Way. Yep. And if you guys weren't at Generation Church this past Sunday, then I just encourage you to go online, whether that's YouTube, our website, generationchurch.me, to watch the sermon. Because we're going to tie in today's episode to Sunday's message. And actually, the next couple episodes, we're going to be talking a little bit about that, about creating basically how to have the perfect day.
Yeah.
You know, that's what we talked about this past Sunday is like, if we are following Jesus, and that's kind of what we said was like, man, the whole point is discipleship is a daily discipline. You know, it's not a class. It's not an event. It's not just an experience. It is a daily discipline. That's what Jesus says in the Gospel of Luke, that we are to deny ourselves, take up our cross, and this is to be done daily. You know, turn from our sins, take up our cross, and follow him. And that has to be done every single day. And so we follow Jesus one step at a time, one day at a time. And so we just kind of started this conversation of like, if that is true, then what does my day look like when it comes to following Jesus? You know, we started out the year talking about 2 things: unintentional formation and intentional formation. And we said unintentional formation is created by your habits, your relationships, the stories you believe, your environments. Then over time and through our experiences, we become who we are.
Yep.
But if I'm focused on intentional formation, then I'm saying those habits, I got to replace bad habits with the practices of Jesus. I've got to replace maybe unintentional or bad relationships or unhealthy or toxic relationships with godly community that's based around hungering after following Jesus, not just looking for harmony, right? We said that it's not just about harmony, it's about hunger. I think so many people try to choose friends or community based on likes, dislikes, you know, maybe what sports they're into, yada, yada, yada. And really what we've cultivated is just we still get to be the same. But when I'm in a community of people who are hungering after following Jesus, you're going to be around people who don't want to be the same, and they love you enough to not want you to stay the same either.
Yeah, man. We even had a conversation with our students a couple weeks ago about your future you is formed by your current you.
Oh, bro.
And so
that was
like,
so good. Yeah, I was there for that message.
Man, and it's like just there's no other time like now is the time to be intentionally formed, because you wake up one day, it's like, how did I get here? And it's like you got here by the habits you formed, the people you're around, your environments, all of those things. So I'm excited for our conversation.
So we said habits replaced by disciplines, bad relationships replaced by community, and then the stories we believe replaced by Scripture. Because Jesus gives us the correct story to live. We said this, like, whatever story you believe is a story you will live in and live out. It lives in you, and you will live that story out. That's why people who have negative paradigms or, just there's certain cynicism that is built because of stories you have believed throughout your life that may not necessarily be true. Doesn't mean that reality isn't real. It just means that what you believe about that reality has been shifted and twisted by the thoughts that we have been planted up here, which is why Paul says in Romans chapter 12 that the only way to transformation is by the renewal of the mind. Yeah. And that's why these things are so important. And then I have to change my environments to actually and we're going to talk about this more in the next 2 episodes, but how do I shift my daily environment to being focused on the presence of the Holy Spirit in my life? And then number 5, of course, is everybody's favorite, but we are formed by suffering and trials. Yeah. That is intentional formation, that as I walk this stuff out, I am going to face trials. I am going to face sufferings. And then over a period of time, I begin to be formed into the image of Jesus. Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at in that vein as a church. And but this past week, we talked specifically about how am I making a daily decision to follow Jesus. But what was interesting is it would have been, I'm trying to think of when this episode is recorded. It would have been almost 2 weeks ago on January 10th. They say the second Friday of January, second Friday of January every year is actually what's called National Quit Day. And that is the day they say that everyone who starts New Year resolutions, they quit them by the second Friday of January.
Which is insane. Wow. I do believe that one of the hardest steps is the first step, but something that is equally just as hard is being consistent and continuing, because you get excited over the new year. You think about someone you want to be, whether that's physically, spiritually, whatever it might be. And then you get 2 weeks in and it's like, wow, I have bit off more than I can chew. I didn't replace, I just added to, and some of those type of things, which that is insane. National
So on that
Quit
vein,
Day.
why do you think so many people quit their habits or their resolutions or goals so quickly?
Well, I think sometimes.
Think about even have you ever had that in your life?
Oh man, 100%. And honestly, even something that you said in your message this past weekend which I don't know if we'll get into this a little bit later, but of your ideal perfect day, right? You talked about you wake up at 4:00 in the morning, you spend time with Jesus, you do a cold plunge, you might go to the gym, then you have your daily offices, your prayer time, how you open your day, how you end your day, and all of these things. And I think sometimes, and I can be this way because I'm an achiever, and okay, so this is what I need to do now to have a perfect day. I'm going to go buy me a cold plunge and basically do what you said, what works for you. And I think sometimes, especially on the internet, we just copy and paste, and we don't look at our own life of hey, what works for me in this season of my life? It's we are in different seasons. So what works for you right now, it might not work for me. And I just have to become okay with that. And so I think people quit because they just try to copy somebody else's lifestyle or season that they are in and just inject it into their life, when it's hey man, work it out yourself. This is what I do. And try to just mine out what works for you and not what works for everybody. And then you just get overloaded and then you quit.
And we'll talk about that. I think for me, what I've seen in our current context of culture is an infotainment culture. I think 2 things. One, it takes 21 days. They say it takes about 21 days for a habit to form. And so we are a quick reward society. They call it there's a book. I haven't read the book, but I've read the premise, and I've heard a lot of people talk about the book. I think it's called Dopamine Nation.
Wow.
But it's just this addiction to what's called the pleasure principle. It's this idea of I am chasing the next pleasure thing, the next dopamine hit. And so we actually live in a culture that, man, because of TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, we have a plethora of people that we follow or watch all their videos because we get so excited or entertained by watching somebody else's transformation.
Yeah.
And so, like, we have, like, our favorite, I always joke about David Goggins because a lot of people follow David Goggins. But it's like, you could probably ask the average person who works out, whatever, like, oh, man, love David Goggins. He's very motivational. But their life doesn't look like David Goggins. You know what I mean? And so there's a level of, like, I'm entertained and inspired, but not enough to actually change my own life.
Yeah.
And I think that's true in our spiritual disciplines and in our approach to discipleship, our approach to actually wanting and desiring to live. Because there's a difference between having a desire, right, and that desire bleeding out into our actions, where our whole body is engaged in what we're trying to do. And so I think that the second factor is that we are in love with new. I think it's why a lot of marriages don't last. Because once it isn't new anymore, people aren't talking about you. They're not gushing over your pictures. They're not gushing over your videos. Unless you're an influencer, but then even influencers, I would say probably the average influencer on the internet, you're seeing about not even 50% of their real life.
Yeah.
I've known people who are trying to become influencers and their home life is a wreck, but on the internet it looks really, really good because, it's infotainment, right? We want to give everybody advice. We want the new, we want all this stuff to entertain us. But honestly, when we look at certain people's lives, I love what Cameron Haynes is one of those guys that I follow that I'm like, dude, I'm so inspired by this guy. But I'm not running a marathon a day, shooting my bow an hour a day, and then working out for 2 hours. That's what he does.
Yeah.
And he's a professional archer. He's like, dude's just crazy. He's my age and runs a marathon literally like almost every day.
Wow. Golly.
But, he has a saying of like, it must be nice. And he said, because when I tell people how I live my life, they're like, oh, must be nice. Must be nice. Excuse me, must be nice to shoot your bow an hour a day and lift and run a marathon. And he's like, but, you don't understand the hard work I put in to get where I'm at today. And I think that's the attitude of, we have one of two reactions sometimes when we are faced with these type of life-changing habits. It's, must be nice. I don't have time to do that. I can't do that. I can't afford to do that. Or, entertain me.
Yeah.
Like, man, that's really inspiring, but it's still not entered into my existence, right?
Yeah.
And I think because we are so in love with starting, that not many people fall in love with consistency. And I think you said that a while ago. Everybody goes like, man, you look like you've lost weight, right? But nobody goes, man, I've noticed the last 3 years you've kept weight off.
Yeah. Wow, that's good.
I never hear people say that. Because what you are celebrating is consistency.
Right.
And nobody celebrates consistency.
Well, and we see that, and we'll dive into this in some future episodes. We see that sometimes in our spiritual walk, too.
Yeah, 100%.
The highlight reel. We get saved. We get baptized. We have a ton of people hugging us, congratulating us, and all those things. And as we, still celebrate people and all of that, but that dopamine hit of like, man. And then 6 months later, you're like, well, man, no one's hug, I don't have 50 people hugging me or whatever. What's the deal? And it's like, which we'll get into that later, but we see that in our walk with Jesus and our formation as well.
Well, it's the insta faith generation, right? Because everything is insta. It's why people go into debt right now. The average couple goes into $15,000 worth of debt, or the average wedding cost is $15,000 today. And most couples will go into wedding debt. Like they actually take out a loan for their wedding. Because we are obsessed with that. We are obsessed with people. I want people to look at our stuff and it's infotainment, right? And so nobody thinks about long-term consistency because that's not what's sexy, right? Nobody is just gushing over like, you telling me for the last year and a half, you've gotten up at 4 a.m. Like nobody, they're just like, man, that sounds really boring. It sounds boring to do the same thing over and over and over. But we'll get into why I think that is a disconnect for people. But most of us, if we're honest, we don't have an end goal in mind.
Yeah.
We have markers, right? Like, I want to lose 15 pounds. I want to stop smoking. But not a vision of who we're becoming.
Yeah.
And I want to say that again. Most of us don't have an end goal in mind. We have markers, but not a vision for who we're becoming. So our language actually reveals our limits. Mm-hmm. I can't remember Atomic Habits. His name is escaping me right now. The guy who wrote Atomic Habits. Fantastic book. But he talks about like your language of like when somebody, if you were a smoker and somebody offers you a cigarette, they said, no, I'm trying to quit. Well, that reveals your limits already. But if you change your language to I don't smoke, it's a different mindset. Because what you're trying to do, you don't really have a vision of being a non-smoker. You just have a marker of like, I don't want to be tempted with a cigarette.
Right.
And that's true with every other thing in our lives. Mm-hmm. Like we kind of have this mindset of like, I'm trying not to sin. I'm trying to do right, instead of, no, I have a vision of becoming more and more formed into the image of Jesus by the end of my life. And if that's my vision, that determines how I live out my day-to-day, my month-to-month, and my year-to-year. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. One of the things that has resonated with me over the past year is like the question isn't who do I want to be, it's who am I becoming?
Yeah, man.
And that alone has changed my perspective on like, who am I becoming? Not just who I want to be, but the things that I'm doing now so I can become that person. So 100%, I completely agree. Your verbiage and your language, man, it has power. Mm-hmm. And so I completely agree.
And I think as you might be listening and you're wrestling through what my intentional habits look like or my disciplines look like or the vision for myself, I think something that's really important and what's going to be really cool as we begin to talk about this in the next 2 episodes is know where you are and know where you're headed. In other words, know your season of life, and understanding your season will change. I think we get so nearsighted that, it can be difficult for you as a parent of 3 young children to think this is how my life is going to look for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Instead of going like, no, I understand, like my kids aren't going to be 2, 4, and 6 forever. Right. And so I have to adjust accordingly.
Right.
That's why when even we get to start talking about disciplines and habits, like I didn't wake up one day and go, okay, these are all the things I want to do every day. It has slowly morphed over the last 7 to 8 years for me, and it changes every year. I actually have twice a year that I reevaluate my rule of life and reevaluate my habits and try to like either if I implement a new one, I try to figure out, hey, what is not benefiting me so I can pull that out. Because at the end of the day, if I'm not aware of where I'm at and where I'm headed, then we can get disappointed when you try to adopt maybe, and you said this earlier, my exact habits, not realizing that my season of life looks different right now. I have an adult child, and I have another teenage daughter who's in high school, and then my son is 9. So the demand for younger children is a lot different than older children. It's still there, don't get me wrong. But our lives look similar but very different because we are in different seasons of life.
And that took me a while to be comfortable in and confident in.
Yeah, man.
Because I used to do that. Just take what they're doing and just insert it in my life. And I got tired, I got wore out, and then I got frustrated. Yeah. And so it's like you can save yourself so much exhaustion and frustration if you can just maybe take one thing.
Yeah.
Don't bite off the whole and apply it to your current season. I even point back to like over Christmas. It's like me and Lindsay, we have we desire and we want to make sure our kids know the real meaning of Christmas. And we knew going into celebrating Advent that it was going to be crazy. Mm-hmm. But we knew, hey, if we don't start now with our children, then when they're 14, 15, and 16, I'm not saying it's too late, but it could be more difficult. And so we're just embracing the crazy.
Yeah.
And I think people need to be just embrace the crazy, man, and it's okay. It's okay.
And 5 years from now, your celebration of Advent is going to look a lot different than it did this year.
Right.
And I think what I would tell people is, I think sometimes when we start talking about these habits or these practices, we compartmentalize them as if they are separate from our life. Until you realize that everything in your life is integrated. And how do I integrate that? Because I don't do these practices instead of being a dad or a husband. They make up who I am as a dad and a husband.
That's good.
And so, like, how are my kids integrated in my spiritual formation?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that too when we start talking about the specifics. But I think that is one of the number one killers, is that when it comes to health, when it comes to spirituality, we don't realize, like, this isn't a hobby.
Yeah.
This is the makeup, the genetic DNA of who I'm becoming in my home, at my work, in the public place. And so if my family sees my disciplines as something that takes me away from them, or I see this as something I have to actually separate from, then one, it's not going to do what it's designed to do. And that is to put me before the Holy Spirit and ask him to change me. Because I'm not just asking him to change me for some kind of spiritual high or a really good devotion or a really good quiet time for God. I'm actually asking him to transform me in the middle of stress, busyness, the demands of life, trying to minister. Like, our kids are a little bit more spread out. So, like, we literally have 3 different seasons of parenting going on. So that has its own demands. I have to, like, put on adult, like, coach cap when I'm talking to my adult daughter. And then I have to, like, put on, like, very, very sensitive time of life for my other teenage daughter and make sure I'm there emotionally for her. And then I have to remember I still have a wild stallion who is running up and down the house, ready, wanting to play some kind of ball every 5 minutes, wanting to be. And so, like, if I'm not careful, I actually remove the change or remove the opportunity for change to actually become the kind of dad that can be all there in all 3 instances. And so that's helping me understand where I'm headed. I stay healthy because I know, like, man, when my son graduates, I'm going to be in my 50s. And so am I still going to be high energy? Yeah. Am I still going to be able to do the things and be adventurous with my son? And especially when he walks into his discipleship years and when he turns 13, we walk into his rites of passage. Yeah. It's like, man, I want to be able to go climb a mountain with my son or go on a camping trip or go on long hikes or do hard things. I don't want to tell my son to do hard things, but yet I can't even do them because I don't take care of myself or prepare myself to be in that season of life. So when I say, like, know your season of life, that's what I mean. Because if I'm becoming the best version of myself, that means as my kids grow up, that continues to change and get better.
Right.
And so I don't want you to hear when we're talking about this stuff, I think we limit it to time.
Yeah.
Well, I might have 30 minutes. Don't think about that. It's not just the time in, but it's what the time in does to me. You know what I mean? And so if you do have 30 minutes, it can't just be like, well, you know, I'm taking 30 minutes out of my day to give to God. It's the one, like, no, while I'm in this 30 minutes, God, you're going to have to work in 30 minutes, what later will take 3 hours.
That's good. And it's the perspective on even, like, I love how you said, like, hey, when my youngest graduates, I'm going to be in my 50s. And when I'm in my 50s, I still want to be these things and to be there for my kid, be able to run, do all this stuff. Most people's perspective is like, man, when he graduates, I'm going to be in my 50s. And it's like, just sucks the life out of yourself because you're in your 50s and maybe older and all those things. But, like, I picked up on the mindsets are completely different. And that's one thing that's like, again, your perspective. You have a vision. You know where you're heading. You know where you're going to be. Yeah. So I'm going to put the things in place now so when I am there, man, I'll be able to enjoy my time and not be down in the dumps.
Well, I get a chance to minister to people every time when they're like, man, it's like, you know, every time I have a birthday, man, you're getting old, getting old. And I'm like, no, I'm getting younger.
Yeah, man.
And what I mean by that is like the closer I get to the kingdom, the younger I become, because I know that, man, once death happens, like once the resurrection happens, I'm made into an eternal body. Wow. And so our perspective has to shift. You know, we see death as the end. Death is not final. And so as a believer, I should not embrace a theology of like, oh man, now will my body break down eventually? Yes. Yeah. That's a part of life. But my perspective is, how do I keep my soul young?
Come on.
And so, and how do I steward my body in such a way that it actually gets full usage that God intended for my body?
That's good.
Not many people tap into that, where it's like, man, I'm getting everything out of this body that I've been given, because this body is temporary, but it's also a temple. It's a temporary temple. And how I treat it right now is actually preparing me for the body that's going to be eternal.
Come on.
I'm preparing myself for what life is going to be like in the kingdom for eternity by living that out right now.
Yeah.
And so I just don't picture in the kingdom that we're just going to be sitting around in our lazy boys watching TV the rest of our life.
Yeah.
To some people, that's the ultimate perfect day for them, is coming home and watching Sports Center or whatever. To me, that is apathetic. It's lazy. It's pathetic. It's non-purpose living, and there's so much more to get out of our minds, our bodies, and our spirits that we are not tapping into.
Yeah, man.
So I really just want to remind people the goal should always be the same: transformation into the image of Jesus. And so I think it's the comparison between a beginner in running and lifting and someone who's been doing it for a while, right? And that's what you want to get from this episode moving into the next episode, is understanding, like, sometimes you have to taper the workouts. Like, if I have a first-time lifter with me, I'm not going to be like, you're going to do exactly what I'm doing today. I have to taper the workout to get them to a level of, like, you increase. Like, my goal is not to, like, as I grow into my disciplines and grow into different seasons of life, my goal is not to spend less time in prayer but more. You know, but, like, right now I'm in an intermediate season of my life when it comes to working out my spiritual disciplines. But one day I'm going to be a pro.
Yeah, man.
That's my goal, is to be a pro. Where like, man, I want to be known as a man of prayer. I love, we're getting ready to do a series in James in a couple of months. And they said that he was known as such a man of prayer that his knees were as hard as camels.
Wow.
Hooves or whatever. And so they said he was just known to be a man of prayer. And it's like, man, I think about how the Bible in Acts describes, is it Barnabas? Yeah, Barnabas describes of a man full of faith and a man of prayer. And it's like, dude, how do you get to that?
Yeah.
That's what I want to be.
And it doesn't happen overnight.
It does not happen overnight. And I think that's what we want to encourage you with as you're listening, because you might be like Tyler when we start talking about specifics, where it's like, I'm going to do all the things. And then you miss a couple of days and you're like, I'm doing none of the things.
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
I made the mistake of one time of running a half marathon, and I reference this a lot. And it's reminded me, like, don't do this strategy with your spiritual life. I ran a half marathon. I ran once. I ran 6 miles and thought I'd be good. But I was not good. I locked up on mile 10. I thought, you just keep going, right? And I completed it. It was cool, but I look back, it's like, man.
You discovered hip flexors?
Yes, those were on fire. But one thing it reminded me of is, like, what if you did train? Like, what if you actually did put the effort in? What could you? Yeah. And so it's like, now I don't want to have the mindset of like, oh, I'm going to, because you have to, when it comes to like sports and competition and things, there are some elements that cross over to your spiritual disciplines, but there are some parts of it that it needs to be left out, because I don't want to just train just so I'm a really good prayer, like, and forget the miracle in that. And so I often have to check myself of like, man, I want to become a person who prays, who seeks the Lord, reads scripture. So it's like, what are the things I need to put now? Not because I can be an awesome spiritual person, but because I get to be with the Father, be intimate with him, spend time with him, and that bleeds over into everything that I do.
Yeah,
so
dude.
I try not to, my spiritual practices and my physical practices, sometimes I try not to do them like I did the half marathon and just go,
Well,
because it gets me in trouble.
The scary thing is you can be a morally good person and not experience the power of God
Exactly.
in your life.
I love what you said a couple weeks ago about getting this information from our brain to our bones, and it's just it's who we become, and it's who we are, which was so good.
Yeah, dude. And I really do think the root problem is no vision.
Yes.
Like, just people don't have a vision. I said it like this in a sermon a few weeks ago. We are living by the demanding, the dollar, and the dream. You know, the demanding is, what is everything around me demanding of me? You know, we live by our kids' schedules. We live by, you know, the demand of culture. Like, if culture says I need to be doing this, I'm doing this. And because of that, we start living for the dollar. That causes us to live by the dollar. And we live in either the prosperity gospel or the poverty gospel, or a poverty mindset or a prosperity mindset. Poverty mindset is money is fleeting, so spend it while you got it, including going into debt or, you know, putting it at the detriment of your financial health or spiritual health or emotional health. And then you have the prosperity mindset, and that is like, get as much as you can, fill your barns, but your life is empty, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is that when you're chasing the dollar, if you don't have an idea in your mind of like, man, you know, I love, I think it was Comer in his generosity practice and practicing the way, he talked about how, like, you know, we never seem to have an idea in our mind of what's enough. And it's like, could you imagine like getting to a certain number that you're not going to live above? Like, you're not going to keep adding subscriptions. You're not going to keep adding things. And then everything you make above that, now you have freedom financially.
Wow.
To be debt free, but also have freedom to be generous, to give when it needs to be given, to say yes to a lot more that God.
Yeah.
I honestly believe the reason why some people can't say yes to God is because they are such poor stewards financially and with their time, that they think that they don't have time or money to say yes to God. But the reality is they have not been a good steward of the life God has given them. And so you're forced to say no because you've already said yes.
Wow.
You've said yes to other things. And so then that leads to the dream. Like, we are slaves to the American dream. We are the only, especially when it comes to the church or Christians, the Christians in the West live so differently than Christians in the East, because we are a slave to the American dream. Get as much as you can, obtain as much as you can. We're materially driven, money driven, success driven. You know, we think that the idea of success is to continue to climb some sort of ladder to a peak. But Jesus tells us that the way to the kingdom is continue to go down lower. And so because of that, you get to the end of your life and you're like, I didn't even live on purpose. Like, I lived according to somebody else's dream. I think that's why people experience midlife crisis.
I was just thinking that, man.
Because you get to a place in your life where you realize, like, man, maybe when I was 10 or 11, I thought, man, like my son right now, he's 9. He'll be 10 next month. And, dude, it seems like every other month it's a different dream. And I love it, though. And I told him, I said, bro, you're at the age, I said, dream about doing whatever it is God puts on your heart. There's times where he's like, I want to be a professional baseball player, but then after that, I want to pastor. Or, you know, I want to do this. And I'm like, bro, like, but then what happens? You live by the demanding, the dollar, and the dream. And by the time you're 45, all the things all the dreams God put in your heart as a teenager dissipate. And now you're depressed.
Yeah.
Now you're feeling shame and condemnation because you're living in a life filled with living in the consequences of you chasing pleasure instead of chasing the image of God, right?
Yeah, so good.
So I really do think that's a big issue, is that people just don't have a vision.
And that's even scripture. I know it's referenced for like the church, but where there is no vision, the people perish. Dude. And it's like, we don't need to just sit back and say, you tell me where to go, but like take ownership of that and for your life. It's like, do you have a vision for your life? Has God given you a vision for your life, and what are you doing to pursue that and be obedient in that?
Dude, it's Jacob and Esau, right? Esau traded his own birthright for a desire in the moment.
Wow.
Like, think about it. And the Bible says he wept bitterly when he realized his brother got the blessing. That's what it feels like to be in a midlife crisis.
Man.
It's the point where you realize I traded my vision for something in the moment.
Yeah.
That's why I think when people get divorced, you ever notice how divorced people all of a sudden get in the best shape of their life?
Yeah. I mean, you see it on Facebook. I mean,
Dude,
you watch that happen.
And it's like, why didn't you do that beforehand?
Yeah.
Because you got no vision. And you traded what you had for a vision. You traded it for pleasure in the moment, thinking that pleasure, that feeling, that experience would last for a lifetime, not realizing you actually have to work for that. And you actually have to have a vision for it. It's chasing the wind.
Yeah.
That's what life is like. I love, man, I'm in Hosea right now. I just finished Hosea. And he says that. He says, man, Israel keeps chasing the wind by chasing idolatry. And that is what we tend to do.
Yeah.
Is you are chasing something that you'll never be able to grasp. Like it's like it's right there. You can see it, but that's the deception of the devil, is that, man, you actually have an image of something that it's the promise, but it's empty.
Yeah.
Right? Like as I grasp it, it's not there. And that's what I love about Hebrews when it says, man, that people who gave their life in faith, when it talks about the hall of faith, as we call it, it says they never got to like experience the promised land or experience the Messiah coming, but they lived as if they could see it not very far off. That it's so tangible that I know that, man, I'm going to get there and I'm going to be able to touch that and receive that. And so, man, if you're chasing the wind, that's when you get to a place in your life where you realized you're like Esau, and you begin to weep bitterly that, man, you didn't even marry the person you really wanted to marry, or you didn't choose the life you really wanted to choose. You lost vision and you settled into an experience and a feeling that does not last forever, especially if you don't cultivate consistency in your life.
Right.
So I think it's this, it's understanding the difficult thing is getting people to confront their own mistakes. And understanding that it's never too late to ask God for a bigger vision and start new. I don't care how old you are listening to this. It's never too late. You ever notice how we think we have to wait till the first of the week, the first of the month, the first of the year to make changes, right?
I'll start on Monday.
I'll start in January. And that's what's powerful about the gospel. You can actually start now.
Yeah.
You can start today. And here's how we said it. We said you just need a reason, a rabbi, and a rule. You need a purpose in your life, a vision. You need teachers and mentors in your life, whether it's up close and from a distance. We have Jesus, but we also have other people in our lives. And then you need a rule of life. You need to set aside habits and things, intentional daily disciplines, right? So that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about what our daily disciplines look like, and hopefully try to help some people set up their own.
Yeah.
So you can take that step. No matter what season of life you're in, you can take that step. So just remember, if you want the fruit,
you have to get to the root. Hey, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the very first episode of Rooted in 2025. And if you like this podcast, if you know someone who might benefit from this, send this to them.
3 people right now.
Right now. 1, 2, 3. Go.
Like, subscribe.
Yes. Leave us a comment. Give us some questions, whatever it might be, because like Pastor Brandon said, we will get to those questions about every 6 weeks. So, excited.
Yeah. And don't forget, leave us questions that you have, so that way we can jump into a Q&A episode every 6 weeks. And that's going to be in the link provided. It was actually provided in the intro. So check that out. Love you guys. We'll see you next time on the Rooted Podcast. Remember, if you want the fruit,
you have to get to the root.
Peace.
See y'all.